Hello, Short Game listeners. If you're new to the show, or new to Life is Strange, this episode may not be the place to start. This week we're covering Life is Strange, episodes 3, 4, and 5, sort of a wrap-up. We've done separate episodes on Life is Strange episode 1 and 2 previously. We'll have a link in the show notes. And you can check those out on our website, www.theshortgame.net, or in your podcast app. Because we're covering 3 chapters of the game, this episode's also a bit of a long one at about an hour and 30 minutes. If that's not your bag, please join us next week when we're going to be talking about Undertale, another really awesome game that is going to be a little bit more the typical short game format. Back to the show. Welcome back to The Short Game. This is a show where we talk about short video games, the kind of things you can complete in an evening or a weekend, or in the case of our topic this week, Life is Strange, in many evenings over the course of nearly a full year. I'm your host, Reagan Kelly, and I am joined this week by Laura Nash. How are you doing, Laura?
I'm doing excellent. A little, emotionally wrought thanks to this game, which I completed tonight, but that fresh emotion will benefit this podcast.
Well, I hope it's not too raw. And Nate, how are you doing?
Having finished it last week, a little bit better. I'm expecting, Laura, for your sake, we'll take several cry breaks. If you need to let it out, I understand.
Tears all over the mic.
I've been getting all of my crying done, so I'll try to keep my cool. If you haven't been playing along with us, we initially started playing Life is Strange when the first episode came out, and we were pretty enthusiastic about it. We did an episode on the first episode. We did an episode of this show on the first episode of the game, and we also did another episode when the second episode of Life is Strange came out.
Maybe we should say chapters.
Yeah, that. Well, we kind of fell off the wagon with that, and with some good reason. First of all, it was coming out at a time when there was a lot of really interesting stuff coming out. And also, and this is going to sound kind of odd, Life is Strange is a really mixed bag. I think this is one of the best games this year. Maybe one of the most important games of the year. But it's also not a game without... We're going to be talking about some of its, talking about it warts and all. This is a game that has some pretty notable problems with many parts of it. And I think that sort of piled up, and right around episode 3, I started losing some steam. And then episode 4 came out, and it completely engrossed me. And so I think overall, with the sum of its parts, Life is Strange is a really fantastic episodic adventure game that explores things that very few other games I've seen have explored. The sort of relationship between 2 young women, the different types of teen angst that we see dramatized, some really scary stuff. It's a really, really solid and interesting game with a lot of little caveats that overall don't completely detract from the experience. But as a way of explaining why we didn't have an episode on episode 3 or episode 4, why we've kind of jumped to the end and now we're doing a kind of a wrap-up episode, it's kind of because it's a little easier to talk about the game as a whole than any individual element of it, which is a little, if you focus a microscope on this game, you can see a lot of cracks. But taken as a whole, I think it's really important.
Yeah, and if this is the first time you're listening to The Short Game or the first time that you've listened to an episode on Life is Strange, go back and listen to the first 2 because we're going to basically, everything is a spoiler because we're starting halfway through the book. I was a person who somehow started reading Harry Potter at book 3.
Weirdo?
Well, accidentally. I didn't. It was an accident. And so...
What do you mean? Wait. What do you tripped and accidentally read the 3rd book of Harry Potter out of order? Or
it was a prop in Oliver the Musical, and I read it backstage.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Not knowing that there were other books in the series. But anyway, as someone who's entered a series midstream, don't start your Life is Strange experience here. Play the game or listen to the first 2 episodes, then listen to this one.
Yes.
That's your PSA.
Yep.
But definitely play the game.
Yeah, absolutely play the game. We're not going to spend much time about how the game works like we might normally.
Yeah, we went over all of that stuff early on in episodes 1 and 2. So if you're interested in our take on that and a little bit more sort of catty discussion of some of the early game plot, go back and listen to those if you want.
By Neptune's beard.
I do want to add on too, just to kind of follow up with Reagan's point, is like another reason I do think that maybe we lost steam a little bit is that I would just, if I had to rank the 5 episodes or the 5 chapters, sorry, I do think that probably the second one, the one that our last episode was about, was probably my least favorite of the whole group
Really?
too. And I think they just got stronger.
Definitely.
I think the first one was fantastic. And then I don't know how I would rank 3, 4, and 5, but I would probably put 2 at the bottom. And they kind of address it a little bit, and we'll get to it in the 5th episode. There's kind of a tongue-in-cheek joke about one of the worst parts of the second episode.
Yep.
But I think that I really liked 5. I think 4 might be the best one. But we'll kind of get through that as we keep
So
going.
structure-wise, I think we're kind of just going to talk our way through the 3 episodes that we haven't talked about on this show already. So starting with episode 3, and we're not going to talk about every detail of the plot. We never fit that in. We'd be on this podcast all night. But starting with episode 3, I think this was a really strong one, and I don't think it. But I think where I said that I kind of lost steam after the end of episode 3, I think it was because of the ending. We'll talk about the ending in a second, but I think the beginning and middle of episode 3 were really strong.
Yeah, I do too. It definitely resolved some of the issues from the second episode, which, just to go real quick with what we're kind of beating around the bush on the issues, was that like they kind of forced in some maybe adventure gamey stuff that probably wasn't necessary. Little quests that felt like just quests instead of a real reason to explore. Because when Life is Strange is working really well, they're forcing you to explore, but you don't feel like pressure or stress about it, like you're happy to be exploring. Whereas some of the stuff in the second game and in the first game, it got to the point where like, okay, where are these damn things that they want me to find? And I do think that for the most part, they removed that entirely. There were a few little fetch quests, I guess, that I got a little hung up with on the final chapters of the game. But for the most part, I was not nearly as frustrated as I was ever again with the second chapter. And the third chapter starts out pretty strong.
Yeah, the third chapter has a lot of built-in recovery exploration where you get a return to that first episode freedom where you're really just exploring your campus, talking to a lot of people. Everyone's kind of recovering from, depending on your game, Kate's death or Kate's attempted suicide. And so there's a lot of, it's a sunny day on the quad where everyone is trying to pretend like there are portents of ominous doom everywhere, and someone didn't just try to commit suicide. There's literally a bird covered in swirling ants.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's those kinds of moments, I think, where the game is just sort of letting you be in the space and, walk up to people and talk to them, or hanging out in a room listening to the radio, or, any of those sorts of more quiet moments of the game where I think the game is really at its best and it's doing something that is more unusual. Like, this game is a murder mystery. It's a sort of pseudo science fiction piece, with time travel and, magic or supernatural powers. It's a relationship story. All of those are really important to what this game is, but those moments where you're just like being a teenager in a space that feels, at least moderately authentic, that's like unusual. Like those moments are what really makes the game for me. And it gives you some nice opportunities to sit on a bench and stare at squirrels, or to, lay on a bed in Chloe's room and watch her do whatever it is that she's doing on her computer, or all those sorts of things. Those are really great moments that a lot of other games just don't give you.
Yeah, this game is built to breathe.
Mm-hmm. You just reminded me too of something that kind of funny that happened to me. So as Reagan is saying, there's a lot of moments where you can like sit on a bench and like a nice song plays, usually some indie like folk song. Like literally there's a Bright Eyes song, which was a little too much on the nose for me. But there was a really, really early at the beginning of chapter 3, there's that moment where you're laying in bed next to Chloe and that song is playing, and it'll just let you listen to the song and just, it'll keep showing different angles of the room and different angles of the sunlight and everything. And if I hadn't said it yet, both Laura and I have both played 3, 4, and 5 in the last week. So this is all very fresh to
Whereas
us.
I played them all as they were coming out, and so that episode is a little farther in my past at the moment. But I still remember that scene really well.
Well, and I had forgotten some of the mechanics of this game. Namely, that stuff happens, and you have to press a button to get out of it. And so I actually sat there for not a really long time, but probably longer than most people watch that scene.
I did too. I forgot what button to press. And I sat there and I was just like, oh, I wonder when Chloe's going to start talking about the next plot development in our murder mystery. And then I was like, this sounds pretty nice. I think it's Bright Eyes.
And then it's on
Oh,
loops.
I can press B.
Yep.
B for Bright Eyes.
So I'm glad I'm not alone on that.
There's a lot of really great, mystery team, investigate the school, investigation team kind of stuff going on in this episode as well. And it feels really like fun, and you really kind of see the relationship between Chloe and Max. Max can be a little annoying on her own as this sort of, I think there's a potential for her character to be a little annoying, but paired with Chloe, a lot of those scenes, like, you see her caring about her friend in a way that I think really makes both characters richer and more interesting.
Max literally runs around telling everybody why she thinks they're great, which sounds like a great thing, but it's actually kind of annoying.
Oh, yeah.
Like, bless you, Max, but every time I want to talk to Justin the Stoner about the murder mystery, not about how he has really nice, hair and smiles all the time.
There is no one that actually talks like Max talks. And I know that it's supposed to be like she's dealing with a ton of shit right now, and like she can see infinite realities, and like she knows that time is precious. But yeah, she'll like go up to just like a random person and just be like, I need to tell you right now how important everything in life is right now while you're drunk.
And specifically you, because you're so great.
She's a college student who just read Proust for the first time. It's like, like, have you tried a macaroon? It'll change your life. Like, she's Garden State Manifest. I love Max, but...
Yeah, I do too. And you said that that Max can be annoying. I would contest that. Literally every single character can be annoying.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
But it's fine. Like, this game does... And like, there's no character that is like completely likable, but there's also no character that is like 100% unlikable, except for maybe Nathan. But of course, as we'll learn, like also literally every character has like some redeeming quality except for one. I know we're not holding off spoilers, but I'll hold off the main spoiler for now.
There were a number of important choices and scenes in Chapter 3, and just to kind of skip through some of them, you explore Blackwell at night, which was great. You're exploring an area that you've been through before, but now in a different context. And it had one of my favorite
with your
uses.
smartphone flashlight.
Oh, that was really cute.
And that is a bright light. Dear God, it lit up like that entire anywhere you would go.
Yeah, and my favorite use of her rewind power ever was the puzzle with the bomb, where she had to go and collect some stuff around the school to build a bomb to blow the door off of the principal's office. But then, because she was able to walk into the principal's office and rewind to before she blew the door off, she essentially teleported into the office and opened the door from the inside while Chloe was still sort of fiddling with the lock. I loved that scene.
That was a super clever use of the mechanics and the adventure game thing. Like, go collect these items and then make it where you didn't actually do any of that, but you solved it. That was great.
Yeah, and it wasn't annoying. Like, it was like, okay, you're gonna go fetch the stuff from the science room, but because it was just a well-designed little piece of adventure game, and I did like that it gave you the opportunity to build a bomb in your school and then undo that action.
They also keep it kind of light while you're building a bomb in a school by having Warren text you the whole time.
Ugh. Did anybody like Warren? Like, am I the only person here who, like, consistently from beginning to end of this game thought Warren was, like, kind of lame and intrusive, and, like, his whole MO was like, I'm this super nice guy. Why doesn't she notice me? Like, ugh.
I don't know. I thought I kind of liked Warren. I don't know. I see, like, but like I said, Everyone is annoying.
Yeah, the only thing I called Warren out for was when I was looking in his file and he has a 4.0, and I was like, nope, no way a science dude actually is that well-rounded. Like, if science is your life, you don't give a shit about English class. Like, I knew science kids. I'm dating one. Like, you probably would have like a 3.7.
That's your problem with Warren? Good God.
Absolutely. The game tried to make Warren so perfect.
They tried really hard to make him likable, and it just made me, like, hate him more. Like, everything about him. Ugh, I just hate his stupid face.
Man,
He got pretty drunk later and was really a bad drunk, so that was kind of endearing, how stupid of a drunk he was.
Well, I was kind of glad that it never forces you into a sort of a romance track with Warren. Like, he seems like he's the obvious, if you're playing Max as susceptible to such charms, he seems like he's the only viable romance option in the game, but it never pushes that angle. And my Max noped off of Warren like real hard. Like, every option, it was a no, thank you, Warren, go away. Whereas I think there was a clear romantic association with Chloe, and I actually bought that angle. Did you guys play or see it that way?
I bought that angle and was super disappointed because you can actually even kiss Chloe at one point as kind of a joke, but the game really backs off of it.
Well, it does and it doesn't. Like, their relationship is clearly like the most important thing in both of their lives. But it's also like, maybe that's really not that. Like, there are some hints that it's clear that like they're thinking about this stuff, but they're also going through a lot. For example, like, if you do kiss Chloe, there's some things in Max's journal where she writes things like, I wish I had kissed her again, or things like that. So it's clear that it's on their minds, but it's also like, I was okay with it not being a story of a life-changing romance. I was okay with it being a story of a really intense relationship that hasn't really moved towards romance and maybe is more just like a really, really deep friendship.
I think it was more obvious that Chloe perhaps wanted that type of relationship more than Max, and also may have sought that type of relationship with Rachel.
Well, I think also that Chloe was hurt after losing Rachel, and she wasn't ready to move on. So I think them pushing into that would have been too soon.
The face animation in this game is definitely not great. But there was the scene when they're in the swimming pool, and it is pretty much 100% Chloe making the eyes at Max, like, over and over and over, and I think Max being pretty oblivious to it.
Oblivious, yeah, just not noticing in the slightest.
I thought it was pretty, at least at times, pretty heavy how Chloe was feeling, and I think they were trying to play Max as like, that is something that's happening, but it is, on the scale of things that are happening, it is very, very low on her things to care about right now.
Yeah, it can be rough sometimes when a game wants to keep a romance option completely open, that it ends up kind of watering down both options, because I think you could play this really strong pro Warren or really strong pro Chloe, but if you try to do that, the game has to be indifferent in some ways.
Yeah, and it kind of has to come to nothing either way in order to keep the game open for every type of play.
Yeah, I'll say that I played both of them pretty heavy to both Warren and Chloe. I think partially just out of like, I want to see what this game, like, that to me was the more interesting gameplay option, but I don't know, it's like, they're teenagers, everyone's playing everyone every way, so why not, and or to kind of put a point on it, I played them both pretty hard, and it ultimately didn't result in very much at all, except for some, like, the game provides a lot of decisions that they treat as if they're going to have a heavy effect, which they do by, like that, like, everything goes kind of red and it's making that like whirring noise. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't think nearly all of them are as important as other ones.
It's funny because, of course, being the short game, all about the romance, we're focusing on this, but most of chapter 3 is a breather. taking a break between a suicide and a ability to jump into photographs and see alternate timelines and stop your friend's dad from being killed.
Yeah, that was insane. So I was actually really skeptical about this towards the end of chapter 3. So the entire ending of chapter 3, we've done all of our sleuthing, and this chapter may have been the longest one. Towards the end, we go into a photograph. Max discovers her new power that she can focus on a photo and literally jump back into her past self at the time that photo was taken. And she jumps all the way back to her childhood on the day when Chloe's dad went out to pick up mom from work and got hit by a car and was killed. And that's sort of the inciting incident that caused Chloe's life to spin out of control and has led to her, I don't know, being a little punk shit.
Yeah, well, like literally, like the scene before this is Chloe having found out some things about Rachel. She's like screaming about how her life is shit because her dad died.
How timely.
Yeah, so then moments later we find out that we can actually go back to the moment and save William, Chloe's dad, from dying. So then, of course, you do that. And there's a couple little adventure-y game things, which is fine. They're kind of
I
fun.
loved that look back at what Max and Chloe's relationship was like when they were children. Like, so I did appreciate this scene for that. That scene was great, and it was really sweet and charming, and you saw some of why they were so important to each other. But then, we save William by keeping him from going out that day, and then we flash forward into the present, and the whole universe is different. The whole timeline has been changed, and Max is a different person, and everything around her is at least subtly different. So Max seems to have, with Chloe having been around, Max never left to go to Portland, and she's now a member of the Vortex Club. If you look through her phone at this point, there's all these shitty text messages. Like, Max seems like she came out as a real shitty friend to everybody.
I don't think so. She just has shitty friends, but she's not a shitty friend to them.
That's a good
She's
point.
Victoria's. She's one of them, and like the text.
But she's been a
messages
shitty friend to Chloe. Like, you look at, like, she hadn't responded to Chloe's text messages for months.
Yeah.
Like, it's kind of shitty. And she goes to find Chloe and see what happened, like, to reunite with Chloe now that Chloe presumably has a dad again. And that's where we get our cliffhanger ending. Chloe comes to the door and is in a wheelchair. She's a quadriplegic, and she has, no motion below the neck. And she's overjoyed to see her friend who hasn't visited her in a while. But that's our final moment for the game, and for the episode. And I was pretty upset about this, partly because I thought, okay, now we're going to now everything that happened up to this point is wiped away, or this is going to have to get rolled back, and then why did we bother? Like, the whole, like, jumping into photos and changing the timeline in these, like, I loved being able to rewind small amounts and, experiment with the choices that I was making as I played through the game. But this idea of, like, let's shift to an entirely different timeline felt like I was kind of being uprooted, and I didn't know where the game was going at this point. And also, I didn't totally love the direction of now Chloe's in a wheelchair, and the game is portraying that as like a dun dun dun.
Yeah,
I mean, I was super excited about the tiny rewinds because it was exploring the power of choice, which is something that, not to go all feminist theory, but something that ladies are not given a lot of in games. So, actually being able to say, my choices matter, and I get to choose what I'm doing and experiment with it was amazing. Going into an alternate timeline where the whole world has changed as a result of your little action was super butterfly effect. And the lesson has to be in every science fiction universe that changing the past is bad. Like, you step on a butterfly, you get 18 Hitlers. Like, changing the past is terrible no matter what. So, like, when she changed the past and came to the door and Chloe was in a wheelchair, I was like, well, that is going to teach her never to go back in time because your friend will have a dad, but is going to be, there was no way that Chloe was going to come to the door happy and normal.
Yeah, that's really true. And it was kind of disappointing that it played out that way. Like that was the moment that I was like, damn it, Life is Strange. Like I was pretty upset about this ending of this chapter, and not in the oh no, poor Chloe kind of way. Like, I didn't really love the way this chapter ended, and it made me less excited about chapter 4. But I'm really glad I stuck with it because I think chapter 4 was my favorite chapter of the entire thing.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But before we move on, are there any decisions you want to go through from chapter 3?
So the choices at the end of every episode, it presents you with your choices. The choices from Chaos Theory, which was the third episode, were you either stole or left the money. What did you guys do?
I left the money.
Oh,
I left the money.
Me too. We're all such dorks.
Well, I thought that I feel like that. What was the final total?
It was for
like,
the
world
handicapped
stats?
fund.
Yeah, and
If it was the principal's own money, I probably would have stolen it, but it was for the handicapped.
It kind of really called back to that when you found out that the principal wouldn't spend the money to install ramps in the timeline where Chloe was injured. Like, where did that handicap money go, actually?
for me at that point, I was like really in like crime solving mode. It was
Yeah.
like the last thing that these guys need is like some heat on them.
Good point.
Because somehow it would come back around or something. So it's like we're solving a mystery, a murder mystery. $5,000 important. Don't get me wrong, but not right now.
In the
Totally.
words of Nathan, keep those pigs off you.
Yeah.
Well, like Max can time travel, get money later when you can do whatever you want for money. Right now, though, probably not the best time.
Side note, Max used to find a casino because she can just rewind time and bet on the winning number.
Oh my God, why didn't they do that?
Side note: Max needed to relax the whole time about everything because she can time travel. There were so many times I was just like, you need to get over this teenage angst stuff and this like, does she like me stuff, because you can time travel
Because
now,
you are
and
literally a god now. Move on.
yeah, you could be president.
If I could time travel, I would just take naps all the time.
6 naps an hour.
Naps are a type of time travel, just to the future and like a half an hour later, and you're still groggy.
That's an excellent point.
I would nap, rewind time, and then go outside my room and do stuff. Yeah.
yeah.
So after that, we had an opportunity to kiss Chloe, and 79% of people did. I know that I did because they're adorable together.
And it was the most interesting selection.
It was. I think choosing not to do that would makes you a boring person. You also have an option to either side with David or with Chloe in the confrontation that happens. And that one actually didn't really stick out to me. It looks like 84% of people sided with Chloe. So did I. Why? These choices, I guess, were less meaningful and less split than the other ones.
There's definitely, I would say the majority of selections, they do a good job where the decision will be like plus or minus 10 from like 50%.
Yeah. This one had fewer of that, though. Particularly the next one, which was who decided to either let Frank's dog run into traffic and be killed or keep the dog from being hurt. And if you let the dog run into the street and get run over by a car and you could have done something about it, you're a monster. What is wrong with you, you monster?
Pompadour.
You let
I mean, there's
Pompadour
lots
get
of dead
killed.
animals.
I know.
Laura, did you kill the dog?
No, I didn't. No, I'm just saying, like, you have the option to, like, let a bird run into a window. Like, there's lots of times in this game where you could kill animals, but don't.
I know. 8% of people did. And I think that's a fascinating look into our society. 8% of people are monsters.
I actually think it's 8% of people who replayed the game and wanted to see what would happen.
Yeah, that may be right.
It's really, that's what it's down to. It's like, Who will you be in this video game?
I'll let you guys in on a little secret. My wife killed Pompidou.
Run.
I know, right?
Run, Reagan. Don't walk.
She's
Run.
been playing Max as kind of a bad girl the whole time, as we've discussed on past episodes, and that's been an interesting side of the game to see, because I wouldn't have seen, for example, how the scene with Frank shakes out with Pompidou dead, but it's very different.
Or you just say, Frank, shut the door.
Yeah.
Which is a solution.
Perfectly
if you don't
fine
kill
solution
the dog.
to prevent Pompidou from attacking you. And finally, you have a choice about whether Chloe has a gun or whether Frank has a gun.
Which didn't feel like a this episode choice, to be honest. I feel like I made
it
that
was
up
pretty
last
minor.
episode.
Actually, there's a lot of guns that get passed around. There are at least 2 guns, and they can be in the hands of multiple different people. Something I thought was kind of interesting is that the scene we'll talk about in a little bit with Frank, which I think is one of the most interesting scenes in the game, just from a technical standpoint, where they go talk to Frank at his trailer. Chloe can have a gun, but it could be 2 different people's guns. She could have David's gun, or she could have what's his name's gun? Nathan's gun, depending on how you play. So it's very easy for her to get a gun, or she could have no gun at all, and it could be one of 2 different guns in the game. I thought that was a pretty interesting.
I don't think that I recognized in those moments that these guns were a specific finite object that were being passed around. It kind of always seemed like there's a gun in play, like anyone at any point could have a gun.
Yeah. So we leave chapter 3 and move on to the great big shocker at the end of chapter 3 and moving into chapter 4. We are in our different timeline, and we're hanging out with Chloe, who is now a quadriplegic. And I really thought that the way that these flashback in time through a photo kind of things were going to work was going to be just a brief, let's just flash back to the past, and then we'll flash back and everything will be back the way it was. But nope, this is your life now. And you're totally different, and Chloe's life is totally different. And this scene, series of scenes, this first almost quarter of the episode that you spend in this alternate timeline where Chloe is now disabled and has, serious health issues. She's her life is seriously in danger, right? These scenes were won me back over. I was a little bit checked out after the end of the previous episode. And the way that these scenes were handled, it worked for me. It was sweet to see Chloe and Max sort of coming together again, and for Max to see all the ways that she had hurt Chloe or could have potentially hurt Chloe in this alternate timeline, and how that related to the way that she had hurt Chloe in her original timeline. Their kind of reunion was actually really sweet.
I mean, off-screen Max is terrible always. Before the start of Life is Strange, episode 1, Max had abandoned Chloe for several years. Even this version of Max has abandoned disabled Chloe for at least 1.5 years since the accident. Mm-hmm. So Max, when she's not on our screens and telling everyone how great they are, is a terrible person. That's the first lesson. The second lesson is that Chloe hates podcasts.
That was hysterical. I could punch your face right now. A podcast? Yeah, everyone has a podcast now.
People fall asleep with Blade Runner. Lots of life lessons in this chapter.
Obviously, this scene, there's not a lot of plot action going on. We kind of understand from the beginning that what we're seeing is an alternate timeline, and eventually we're going to have to get back to the main one. So no choices you make in this section of the game really feel that weighty, but it's a really good moment for characterization and just sort of, telling of the story of these 2 people and their relationship with each other.
You do get to make one decision that has basically no repercussions, but is actually a heavy decision, which is, do you euthanize your friend or not when she asks you to?
Yeah, and that was pretty rough. I sat there, there's a number of choices that I had to make in this game where I sat there with my controller and the choice up on screen and just stared at it for a good 1.5 minutes. And this was one of those. I chose to not do it. Mainly because I just didn't want my Max. I knew Max was going to be flashing back to the future again. You know, she's off this timeline. She's going to jump right the heck out of this timeline. But I didn't want her to be taking that experience of watching Chloe die with her. So I said no.
I did say yes. And I will say that I do think a lot of decisions became counterfeit a little bit or undercut by this ability to go back in time, because like you just said, you're like, I didn't want to do it because I knew it would affect, like, all that would matter is how it affected Max's, like, feelings, kind of.
Her
But it didn't
psyche,
actually,
yeah.
Yeah, it didn't really matter for the real decision. And I tried to keep it, like, I guess I tried to keep it in mind that, like, maybe I won't be able to go back. And that's kind of how I made a lot, even though I knew, because it's a game and you're going to be able to go back. But, like, so I ultimately did. And, you know, I don't know. She really, like, once they basically said she's going to die, which also undercuts the decision itself a little bit
Horribly,
too.
yes.
Yeah. Like, I think this is Laura's point. You said it before we started recording, but basically, like, it's a lot harder of a decision if we don't know that Chloe's going to die, but they basically say, like, she's going to be dead very soon. So you're just, like, kind of expediting it for her, you know, stopping a lot of the pain.
Well, it wouldn't make much sense for her to ask if, like, it'd be pretty ghastly to be, you know, for the game's message to be being in a wheelchair is a fate worse than death.
But Chloe could want to die.
Oh, yeah, sure.
No, Chloe could want to die. And I think it's actually a much more nuanced, a much more interesting choice of someone wants to die to put it into a situation that someone not in that situation thinks is just fine.
Yeah.
And I think that is a more difficult choice.
You may be right.
And
right, because if it was just like she was going to be in that state, in pain, but alive for maybe the rest of her life, that's a lot harder decision to make than, like, the doctor saying, well, she's probably going to be dead within the next month or two. And you doing this is just helping her get there faster.
Yeah.
So I did, and it does come back a little bit. There's a moment later in the game where you have to kind of, I don't know, prove your commitment or prove that, like, Chloe, shut up and listen to me. You don't know what I've been going through. And you basically say, like, I've watched you die.
Multiple times.
You asked, yeah, you asked me to kill you, and I did it. And you don't know what that's like. And that's kind of like, she's like, oh, shit. You're right. I will listen to you. So it does come back a little bit.
Yeah, it comes up in dialogue for sure. So obviously, with that horrifying choice completed, we move back to our main timeline. We find a photo from before that, you know, that Max is able to use to go back, undo her change to the past, and then flash back to the present again. And now she is, now she's back on her original timeline. And then, like, it's a huge relief. Everything is kind of back to normal, and Max is back with Chloe, and we have a couple of scenes, or a little bit of a sequence where really the tone lightens up a little bit again, and we're back to kind of investigation team. And part of that is going to see Frank to try to get some crucial information about his drug contacts, or who he sold drugs to, or trying to implicate Nathan. And this scene, I think, is maybe, just in terms of the choice mechanics, the most complex in the game. And it may not be the most important in terms of the plot or in terms of the characters or really anything else, except that this is the most impressive technical scene in the game from a storytelling standpoint. We go to see Frank, and we knock on the door of his
RV.
And there are about 15 ways that this scene can go horribly wrong. And it's a really interesting little puzzle of using the rewind mechanic to figure out how to get through it without having to shoot his dog, if the dog is still alive, you monster, without having to shoot him, without having him stab Chloe, without all sorts of
I never
other...
got that one.
Oh, yeah, he'll stab Chloe to death. Actually, really interestingly...
Even if she has a gun?
well, like in a struggle, or maybe he shoots her. Sorry, maybe I don't remember. Somebody gets stabbed. I think it's if she doesn't have a gun, somebody gets stabbed. There are many, many, many ways this can go wrong. And something that's fascinating about it is that the developers put out a flowchart of this scene. And if you put it at full size, you have to scroll across. It's horizontal. You have to scroll across, like, it looks like if you were to print this out on regular sized paper, pieces of paper taped end to end, it would go the whole way across your room. It is enormous. This flowchart has hundreds of nodes on it. It's the most complex part of this game, without any doubt. And I'll put a link to this in the show notes. It's enormous.
Perhaps I was just lucky, but I kind of cut off the first 4 or 5 paths pretty quickly, and then we're able to pick. I probably got through it 4 plays to a non-violent conclusion.
Oh man, I actually had my first one. Chloe shot both the dog and Frank.
Yep, first one that happened, but that lets you steal the code, so you needed to fail once.
You can just shoot them both and then walk away with the code,
leave.
And that's it. That's your choice for the game if you want, which I think is really bold.
Yeah, and then my next one navigated it fine. I know I got lucky on some of them because it was like you're picking one of 4 dialogue choices a couple times. But when I left on my second playthrough, Frank was really happy and he'd reconnected with Chloe on a level, and we had all kind of left like, you know what? We're all in this together.
Yeah,
and
that
Frank
ending is there, but it took me at least 8 tries to get through this and get that ending.
In Chapter 2, did you try to shoot Frank?
Yes.
Okay, because that made it harder.
Yeah, that
it did
same
make it
here.
harder.
It made it harder for me as well.
I just got lucky, I guess, with the because it was literally once I killed I killed both of them. Second one, we all left like renewed and best friends, and Frank was an ally the rest of the game.
Yeah,
He's sending you helpful text messages. That's great.
Oh yeah, he's awesome.
That scene, I really, really respect that scene, and I think if more scenes in this game had been like that, as complex as that would have made the game, I think it would have been much more impressive. This is the place where the rewind mechanic really paid off in just terms of gameplay. Like, I was astonished at how complex this game was. And there were multiple things that when my wife played through it, she saw that I didn't even see, and I played through to, I think, 8 possible variations, and there are more than that. Really impressive.
Wow.
And then with that information, you go home and have another scene that is a totally new mechanic for the game, introduced in Chapter 4. Totally weird. The investigation board scene.
Detective game.
I didn't dig this at first, but I kind of see why they did it, and also I think it grew on me. Like, did the investigation board scene work for you guys?
It was fine. I guess I did appreciate it on a gameplay level. Like they'd been having you collect clues basically, and like Frank literally calls you like the Hardy Boys, and you've been collecting a million different clues, and they needed a mechanic to tie it all together. It was a little like info wall-y and like, random guesses at connecting the dots. Molly actually played this scene with me, and her and I went through a lot of it together, and it was good to have like an extra set of eyes on it.
Yeah.
But like, it was not very exciting.
Yeah.
But I
wouldn't say that this was like the collect 5 bottles scene of this episode, but it was, in a sense, it kind of felt like the plot stopped moving forward while you had to...
it was an easy way to connect a lot of dots, though.
I've done MIT Mystery Hunt for fun. I've done lots of puzzle hunts. This is kind of my bread and butter. And I think it would have been more fulfilling had the interface let you see things side by side.
True.
It was very difficult to accomplish this, only being able to see the different, screenshots or the letters or elements full screen.
Yeah, you had to do one at a time. You had to be like, wait, what was that one again?
Yeah,
Pull
I took
it
a lot
up.
of notes during this scene.
It asked you to take notes, and I really, this is maybe a controversial opinion, but I think anytime a video game makes you take out a piece of paper and write, and that is not something that someone has bought into, it's a problem.
Or if the first time they did that, it's the fourth
chapter.
the middle of
You're
the
not
fourth
expecting
chapter.
it.
Because I didn't take, I almost never take, even on the games that we do have notes for, I very rarely do the notes. And I know at my hindrance, but that's just not something that like feels natural to me in a video game. This part took me a little while because it'd be like, wait, which scrap of paper said 10:04 p.m. And then a lot of them are written in like chicken scratch. So not only do you have to pull up the item, I would at least, for me, I'd have to hit that additional clarifying button that said read so I could see it in plain white text.
Absolutely. And, there are games like Fez that say, if you want to decode the secret language in that game, you're going to have to take screenshots. But you opt into that. And Life is Strange is forcing that upon everybody. And the interface is just not helpful.
It didn't make it that hard, though. Like, it gave you some outs, too. Like, for example, the phone puzzle where you were trying to figure out what... I forget whose phone it was now off the top of my head. Nathan's phone. Where you're trying to figure out the passcode to Nathan's phone. If you failed at that enough times, it kind of gave you an out and gave you a different way to type in a longer code that it would just flat out give you.
Yeah, so, it was like it wasn't that bad.
Nothing
but
was
it was just
hard.
It was very different and
inelegant.
Yeah. Yeah, so it wasn't my favorite thing about the game, but I actually did appreciate the opportunity to kind of step back and say, okay, what have we learned so far, and what is it leading us towards? And what it leads us towards is the location of the barn.
The murder barn.
I know. Anytime you see a barn in a game like this, like, oh, this is where they're going to find the bodies hanging from the hooks.
And I do want to say real quick, what I did really appreciate about this entire murder mystery, is that this isn't a case of where the player knows more than the character. Like, we're learning with them. So that information wasn't like, hey, I know what it is. I just got to get Dum Dum Max to know it. It was like, we're figuring it out together.
Mm-hmm.
As inelegant as it was, I did find it successful at conveying the information and really, really quickly tying about 14 different threads that we've been working on into one singular location. Like, it brought all of those storylines, the surveillance, the phone calls, the text message, everything. That's all done. Now we have the farmhouse.
Yeah.
And everything can
that was
start over.
spectacular. And agreed, it was cumbersome, but I think the extra level of detective work that it required made you feel like you were part of the solution.
Yeah.
Most places would have gone to cutscene, and I really appreciate you being a part of the decision to figure it out.
And it did kind of mean that, like, once we did find out where this barn was, I was like, I'm eager to go there now, even though it is a murder barn. So,
for sure.
There's an
right
entire
away,
song called "Don't Go Into the Barn," and I was like, we're just
Singing
hanging
that
out
to
in
yourself.
murder barn.
yeah,
It's for sure a murder barn. There was no other way it was not a murder barn.
So
let's talk
into
about
the
the murder
barn
barn.
we go. And what was really neat, I guess, was that it wasn't what I expected at all. I expected to go into the murder barn and find maybe
Corpses.
Rachel Amber's body or something else, but we actually find a tidy little darkroom, a little photography studio and darkroom underneath this barn. And our investigation team checks it out and finds a bunch of letters to and from Nathan down there. So, oh boy, are we really hot on the trail of Nathan. He's got a secret photo studio down there for some reason.
And then they find the binders full of women.
Yeah.
Binders full of women.
I was kind of disappointed
gross.
given the phrase binders full of women's
Yeah.
presence that they went with
It's been a
binders
while.
full of women, but
It's been a while. How else would they categorize?
there's a computer down there. They could be using Lightroom.
Oh yeah.
You're
well,
gonna for sure have at least some binders.
It's so we had been seeing these hints at these red binders with creepy photos, and they been appearing. Well, now we find that those are a part of this creepy photography studio underneath this barn in a bunker.
Dun dun dun.
Yeah, it's unclear at this point, like, what exactly happened, but we know now that Rachel Amber got taken down into that studio and photographed, and there are photos of her groggy and tied up. This
And also being put into a hole.
Yep.
right. Oh,
You
God.
also
This is
see
the
her
moment.
waking
This is-
up and
Yeah.
getting fiercely angry and then being put into a hole in the ground.
Yeah, this is at the very end of the episode. So we jumped a few like random puzzles and stuff.
Yeah,
That's
no
fine.
big deal.
But like
this was the horrifying ending. Not
Not
quite
the end,
actually.
though.
The horrifying lead up to the ending. When we find this, like now, everything about this screams rape, right? Like horrifying. I mean,
Yep.
there's this is like the most deep, disgusting violation.
And there's fetish photos all over the walls.
Oh, it's disgusting.
we see the mess down there, and there's an empty binder of
Victoria.
Victoria.
Right. Yeah.
So from these photos, they notice two things. So one, there is a photo of Rachel going into a hole at the junkyard, and two, there's an empty binder of Victoria Chase.
Yep.
So from there, they go to the junkyard, and we have the gruesome discovery where they actually dig up and find the body of Rachel Amber, which is a terrifying moment, because I don't know about for you guys, I did always kind of hold out some sort of hope that maybe Rachel was still alive. And once that happens, it's like, oh shit, this is for real.
Yeah, and that was so upsetting. That scene was so like this game has sometimes uneven writing, sometimes kind of bad facial animations, almost non-existent lip syncing, but the voice acting is almost
great.
universally great. And
Yeah.
the anguish in the voice of Chloe when she discovers Rachel's body underground, buried in this shallow grave, was just the most heartbreaking thing. I was like, they just nailed it on the voice acting on this, and that scene was just desolating.
The ghost doe that you saw in that terrible Fetch Quest junkyard scene actually has meaning. It's kind of the spirit of Rachel being released.
Yeah, it was literally standing right there on that spot where her body was in one of the early scenes in the junkyard. Kind of makes the junkyard scene a little creepier too, doesn't it? Because they were basically walking all over the place right where she was.
Yeah, that was one of the hardest scenes to watch. And also, what was a really good job about it too is that that was one of the hardest scenes that you had no play in. Like up to this point,
Absolute
like,
cutscene.
yeah, like a lot of this game, the really heavy-hitting emotional stuff was like, what do I do right now? But this was happening regardless.
You were
and it
just there
showed
for your friend, yeah.
Yeah. And it was really well done. And from there, Chloe is now, we're all convinced it's Nathan. Surely it's Nathan. Of course it's Nathan. So we need to do two things. We need to go and find and destroy Nathan. And then we also, this is more Max than it is Chloe, but we need to warn Victoria in case Nathan gets to her before we can get to him.
And so we go to the party that's been being built up as, I thought the party, throughout the whole game, I thought that the party was going to be the climax of the game. Like,
Absolutely.
I thought it was going to be the climax of, like, episode 5. And yet here we are towards the end, can't possibly be that much longer in episode 4, and here's the party already happening. And I was pretty surprised. And it was a little bit of a disappointment in a sense, because like it had been being built up as this, end point for the game almost. And yet when it rolls around, it was really just kind of a slightly shitty teenage pool party with bad lighting.
I know, and I wanted it to be like every rave on Skins, where like you feel like everybody is just soaked in amphetamines and drugs.
Like a teenage Eyes Wide Shut was what I was envisioning.
Yes! I wanted, like, every projection to feel like it was kind of a tattoo on someone's body.
Yeah.
And instead, like, you got a bunch of red lights in a pool party and a really long line for the women's bathroom.
And you gotta stop Alyssa from falling in the pool.
Poor Alyssa.
Oh,
Bless
geez.
Alyssa. In, I would like to say every episode, but if not every episode, almost every episode, Alyssa almost gets hit by something.
Oh, every
You can
single
stop
one.
it.
There's an Alyssa, save Alyssa from something in every
Getting
single
hit
episode.
by something.
Yeah.
The best little trolley joke use of rewind time is kidding, Alyssa gets hit by a pool noodle. Alyssa gets hit by a puddle. Alyssa gets hit by a frisbee. Like, bless Alyssa. Like,
Yeah.
what is wrong with her?
I think it's just like these are all high school kids. Like it is a little weird that the party's so built up, and then you have to remember, like it's kind of treated like it's a college because it's like a super crazy little private thing. But like these kids are 18 at the oldest,
Yeah.
and probably some of them are younger than that, which is a little weird when you're in the gym and it's like most people like have very little clothes on. You're like, this is weird because everyone's 18 or younger and it's a video game.
You get to see Reagan's favorite person, Warren, be very drunk.
God, he's gross. I hate him.
I think you just see too much of yourself in him, Reagan.
I agree, actually.
Warren is
As
holding
I
up.
take exception to
young
all
Reagan, like you see too much Warren in yourself.
Warren is holding up a mirror to you, Reagan, and it's hard. It hurts.
Oh,
Laura
rough.
knows teenage Reagan far too well, and so unfortunately, I'll have to defer to her on that. But
Warren's favorite game is Freedom Planet. We talked about it.
gross. So, but you actually get to one of my favorite conversations you get to have in the game, and one of the ones that's like most affected by the way that you've treated people throughout the game is you try to warn Victoria about the creepy shit that might be about to happen to her. Like, you go to Victoria in this pool party and you're trying to tell her that her close friend Nathan may not be the person that she thinks he is and may in fact be planning to murder and violate her. And depending on how you've treated her throughout the game, you get really different responses, and you have 3 different options as to how to progress here. So you can either not warn Victoria, you monster, or Victoria will either believe you or not believe you, depending partly on what type of responses you give in the dialogue, but also on how you've treated Victoria throughout the game. And this was the biggest difference between my wife's playthrough, where she was playing sort of mean girl, and my playthrough, where I was trying to be nice to everybody. And I thought Victoria was like my favorite character in the game, so I tried to be buddies with Victoria as much as possible. Victoria completely believed my version of Max, and and they had a kind of a good chat, and they kind of worked past their past differences, and it was a really interesting scene. And then in my wife's version of Max's timeline, basically Victoria just ignored your warning and told you that she thought you were stuck up and that you should get over yourself, and walks off and chooses to ignore your advice. This scene was really, I don't know, I thought, wow, things are really starting to pay off. My choices are really starting to matter here.
Yeah, I had the same total outcome as you. Victoria did believe me. I will say that I was not the Victoria cheerleader that you were, and I wasn't a dick to her if she didn't deserve it, I guess, but I definitely wasn't like, praise be to Victoria. Like I definitely took the moments when she deserved it to be mean,
Well, yeah,
or like
sure.
to put her in her place.
I will say occasionally this game was a little transparent in the Victoria dialogue. I was a more ambiguous person like Nate, but Victoria did say things like, and if you remember back in a few days ago when paint spilled on me and then you were nice to me, the impact of my decisions on that conversation was made so visible that it took me out of the conversation slightly. But I appreciate that it came in. Like, I love the impact. I just wish it was done a little more subtly.
They did the same thing with we talked about it in episode 2 with Kate at the top of the roof. She was like, it was like a robot checklist of like, oh, but also you did this moment for me, and I will say it exactly. And then also you didn't do this one thing to me, and like they definitely like repeat back to you the specific choices that you've made, and it probably just in the dialogue could have been a little bit more nuanced. Like they don't actually have to say like you didn't take a picture of me when there was paint on me. She could have just said you've been nice to me in the past, and we as players would have been like, yes, I was nice.
I
to you
have
in the
been
past.
nice.
Yeah, you don't have to like robot checklist it back to me.
Yeah, I don't think players, the machines keep the checklist for us, but I do not believe as players we keep that kind of one-off checklist in our head at the whole time. We think about like we've played the character as we played ourselves, or as a nice person, or as a mean person. And so I think that there's more affordance for nuance than the creators might have guessed.
Well, I think there's a certain element of this where they just want to, the places where they really branch based on your choices are necessarily limited. And they kind of, I think, want to hang little lanterns on the places where your choices do matter and want to make sure that you don't miss it and think that you're on rails.
Sure.
And I think that, I was willing to excuse that because I thought that the dialogue overall was pretty good. I think this was actually a high point in terms of the writing.
I agree. I think the writing only got stronger as this game went on, but it is those little moments where they're just like saying back to you the actions that you performed felt clunky. Other than that, like 3, 4, and 5, I've very rarely felt any detachment because of the writing.
So we've mentioned the creepy body discovery, and we mentioned saving of Victoria. But, after Victoria is announced to have won the Everyday Hero contest, you go back to the graveyard, the junkyard.
No, it's because you get a text message from Nathan that says something to the effect of, I know you were down there. I know what's up.
I'm destroying the evidence.
I'm destroying the evidence. And so you and Chloe are like, oh, shit. For some reason, we need to get to the junkyard, which I will say, I'm only going to go on this for just a moment. They should have gotten someone of police authority
Get
involved.
the cops.
I mean, don't go into the murder barn.
When you find
the
body,
police when you find a dead
then
body.
Call
The body. The body is, I do, at least on the narrative level, I get it. The Prescotts own everybody. Like, you can't get the cops involved too soon because they'll cover it up. But the moment you find the body of the person that is like a huge missing person in the town, you are going straight to the police. And you're saying, hey, also, Victoria Chase is probably next because of this evidence. Mm-hmm. Go get her too and put her in a safe spot. Go find Nathan. Tie it all in a bow. We got it. Like,
text message mechanics are built into this game. I mean, you have a cell phone. While you're driving to the party, call the cops.
Jesus.
Yeah, call Victoria.
They tried, actually. I think they tried to text Victoria at one point, and she wasn't responding. So, like you do when
call
you're
the
not
cops, warn Victorian person.
Call if you don't think the cops in your town are trustworthy, which they had established that. You found a dead body. There is a police station that will listen to you. There's that cop that kind of sets himself up as kind of a good guy that you've talked to in the diner a couple times.
Diner cop.
Yeah.
Diner cop seems to be a great cop. And like them running to the junkyard because of the text message, like, I'm destroying the evidence. It's like, that is a stupid decision.
It took me out of it too. Overall, I think that this seems like these scenes may have been restructured in some way. Like, really, I don't think that if in a perfectly structured chapter 4, there would be one junkyard scene, and here there are 2. And why is really hard to understand. I kind of feel like maybe at the time playing it, I thought, this seems odd. I wonder if maybe they had to readjust this in some sort of a rewrite for plot reasons. And maybe they did, but we'll never know. But we go back and have what was the most WTF ending of any of these chapters. They've all sort of ended on cliffhangers. But we go back to the junkyard. We start redigging up Rachel Amber to make sure that the body is still there and that Nathan hasn't destroyed the evidence. And from out of nowhere, Mr. Jefferson, the photography teacher, comes up behind Max, injects her with a drug in the neck, and then shoots Chloe. Or maybe in the reverse order. I'm not totally sure.
No,
it's your correct order.
Which it works out unbeknownst to him, because otherwise Max would have just gone back in time. But because she is almost immediately not in control of her body, she can't go back in time. And what's actually is a little nice, you see her trying to put her arm up to do like the wiggly back in time arm movement
the
that she does.
Thing.
Yeah. Sure. And you see Chloe get killed, or at least get shot, and then you see Mr. Jefferson's face fade to black. End of the episode. And what did you guys think about this twist?
I saw him and was like, oh, that makes sense.
Yeah, I thought it made sense. I was a little surprised, but come on, he's been the creepiest adult the entire game, with the exception of David, but like
he's been sexually linked to every female in the game other than Joyce, Chloe's mother.
right.
Mm-hmm. A lot of times it's the women, it's the younger girls like talking about him. And like there's that scene where we see Victoria essentially offer him sex for the winning the champion or winning that contest.
Mm-hmm.
And he like very responsibly turns her down. And it was actually that scene that I was like, okay, they're trying too hard to make him look like he's like a really good guy. Something's not right here.
Yeah, after I finished 4, I did watch a few. Someone did an excellent YouTube breakdown of Creepster Mr. Jefferson, where by Geek Remix, where for example, they don't look at a single man the entire classroom scene for the first scene. Only looks at female students. Kind of, when you start listening to Mr. Jefferson dialogue, he's always creepy. I had the gut feeling when you could blame Mr. Jefferson for Kate's suicide or attempted suicide.
Yeah.
She survived mine. Thank you very much.
Yep.
Mine as well.
That, you could blame him, and I wanted to, but I didn't have enough evidence, so I didn't. And then I felt when I saw his evil creepmo face, I was like, I should have accused him of the suicide.
It's just that like weird trope where it's like in every episode of CSI, it's going to be like the guy who was like there and seems cool and is just a part of it. It's like, who's the least likely person in this group? But maybe had like the right little amount of foreshadowing is going to be the bad guy. And like, I think what they do with it is good. I think episode 5, which we'll get into shortly, is good, and how they handle Mr. Jefferson is good. But I almost wish that there wasn't this twist. Like I almost wish that it was.
It was.
Just
I kind of wish it was just
Nathan.
Nathan.
Yeah,
like,
and frankly, like they spend some time in episode 5 kind of trying to like humanize Nathan, and it's like that was like, don't waste your breath.
If
like,
you talk to people at the Vortex party, they humanize Nathan as well, but
like you can't humanize him after he drugged and then forcibly photographed and in a very creepy, violating way, and then murdered a girl. And then had a
Nathan
hand
did
in
not,
doing the
though.
same thing.
no, he did. He killed Rachel. He killed Rachel.
yes.
Yeah, because he wanted to be like Mr. Jefferson.
Yes,
he
yes.
is not a good.
He's
like, to me-
100%
Nathan's
responsible
not a good
for
person,
Rachel.
no.
And then
Yeah.
at least partially responsible for what happened to Kate and maybe others. Who knows? And like he's despicable, regardless of any extenuating circumstances. And I thought that
Nathan
every
is
attempt
still
they
a
made
terrible person. I'm glad I suspended him.
I guess I did too. I did not need a twist, I guess is what I'm saying. Like this, it was fine. Like episode 5 is good, but it also doesn't need this.
No.
Like Mr. Jefferson was fine being the creepy but world-renowned photographer. Like it's cool. He's a character. Principal Wells was a fine character. Everyone had their flaws, but they also had their strengths. Like let the bad guy be the bad guy, and let me just bring down essentially Joffrey. If you know, like that was my connection the whole time.
Well, I didn't hate it, but yeah, it's it's a murder mystery kind of thing to do, to have a surprise culprit at the end.
Which is fine. Like it was fine with what they did with it, and I still enjoyed it. But part of me was like, okay, that's cool too, I guess.
So, of course, that leads right into chapter 5, where we're waking up in the dark room, in the creepy underground photography studio, and Max is tied up Oh my god, it
Yeah.
was so
I
violating.
mean, okay, I find it very cliche to see this kind of violence against women, and I understand why it's important and dark and whatever, but I mean, I'm very tired of it. I'm tired of it.
Yeah, like I didn't need this to happen to Max. Like, well, I mean, I like I understand where they were going, and I also like certainly like in a game where this is happening to young women and you're playing as a young woman, there's a sort of an expectation that if shit goes south, this might happen to me.
I mean, I watched a
And-
ton of Degrassi It Goes There, and
Right,
I
right.
watched everything. I've seen this played out so many times, and the one peripheral saving grace of this is that it definitely tries to go out of its way to say that they were not raped.
It's not specifically for that reason, right?
But it's still fetishized.
It's a stand-in for rape that they felt more comfortable putting the player into. Like, I think that it would have been a shocking choice to make a game wherein the player character gets raped. And
No, I don't think it would have been shocking. I think it would have been really.
I don't mean it would have
tired.
been good
No,
shocking. I would
I'm
have been
just saying-
shocked to see it.
It's kind of dark for dark's sake, and I
Right.
was very happy to move past it as quickly as humanly possible,
And it took so
get to
long
points where
to get past it.
Yeah.
Max just needs to get back in control of the story, because that's what this game is about. It's about Max making choices,
Yeah.
and when Max is tied up and drugged and put in a fetishistic situation, it's just boring.
And I think it was a mechanic too, kind of like what you were saying there, is that part of it was they've made her like invincible. All she needs is a free hand or literally a photo and nothing matters. So I think part of this was like, how do we get her where she can't use her power?
I mean, it's literally pumping her full of kryptonite. Like,
Yeah.
and I just wish that they had found a different way to depower Max.
Maybe,
See,
yeah.
and that's why I don't like that's where the Jefferson thing. It's like it's not Deus Ex Machina, but it's like Deus Ex like creepy bad guy.
Yeah.
It's like,
I know.
and it's like it did feel like, of course.
Now, one thing I will say in its favor is that I liked how this became a sort of a desperate clawing, trying to get free, and not physically, but using her time power. So, like, she was in a situation where she not only was drugged, but had been drugged for a while. She couldn't just rewind a couple of minutes and be back out of this situation. She was in a situation where she needed to jump back pretty far, and she only had a few photos nearby, and in fact, very few of them, and she was kind of jumping back photo to photo, and it felt like desperation because her options were running thin. She had just a few photos that were accessible to her. They didn't take her anyplace particularly good. Like, for example, she could flash back to a photo that had been taken of her, but it was of her when she was already tied up, so it didn't do her that much good, but she was able to use that as a springboard to find some other photos that had been nearer to her in that situation. So that aspect of it, this sort of like desperate struggle to survive, was something that was new in the game. And I had my reservations about the scene. Really, I had a lot of reservations about the scene, but actually it did feel like a struggle in a way that few other scenes had.
I completely agree with the struggle. I just find that this particular exploration feels like I see on every CSI, every special victims unit. Yeah.
Their goal was to subvert that, I think. And it may not have been subverted properly. But I think their goal was, I don't think that they were, or at least I like to think that the writers were like, it wasn't like, oh, wouldn't it be shocking to the viewer if she was in this situation? Be like, what if she was in this situation, but our girl has time powers? And how would that alter like that type of shitty situation. And I don't know that they necessarily execute that properly.
I trust the authors on that count. I just don't trust the authors to say, we're going to be the adventure game that goes dark.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like to kind of piggyback on Reagan's like struggle. Some other good things come to fruition in these scenes where throughout the game she had been starting to get nosebleeds and things while traveling in time, and I liked how as she went back in time, the different scenes she went to were becoming more and more like messed up. She could only go through certain parts. There's just like the time goo was everywhere. And it definitely was chaotic, and it definitely, there was a lot of scenes in this where as she's struggling through different situations to get out of the shitty dark room, where you could go back in time, but it was like 10 seconds, and within those 10 seconds you had to make that decision, and if you didn't solve it, that person or whatever, it would end very poorly. A lot of the other time decisions, you could, no pun intended, take your time with it. You could go back like a minute. You could explore fully. You could solve stuff. This was like, go back, make a snap decision. Does it work? No. Go back, make a snap decision. Does it work? No. And it definitely, things are they move a lot faster in this. Yeah.
And I want to give a shout out to the absolute insanity of episode 5 of like blood on the windows and like dead birds piling up.
It's madness. And then, of course, we've got the scenes that happen when the tornado hits, where we see all the scenes of the game destroyed with people's bodies everywhere. And it is madness. And you begin to get the sense... I mean, obviously, this is not just an implication; it's part of the plot. Like it begins to dawn on you that Max's time powers are the reason for all of the madness that's been happening in Arcadia Bay, from the whales washing up on the beach and the weird lunar thing that happened where suddenly there were 2 moons in the sky, the snow that fell in the middle of the summer, that all of these weird things, including the gigantic storm that has been heading for Arcadia Bay, all of these things are because of the sort of throwing off of the balance that, Max has been doing. And that becomes really key at the end of the game, that, we're struggling to, make this enormous effort to use the time powers to correct everything that's gone horribly wrong, to save Chloe from having been murdered at the end of Act 4, and go back and fix that, and to fix everything. And it's taking such effort on Max's part that she's clearly, she's getting nosebleeds, that the scenes that we're flashing through are no longer like fully formed, and they have that sort of photographic process look to some of them. Everything's clearly falling apart. And really, there's no meaningful choices to make in this episode until the final one. It's a bit of a movie compared to some of the previous episodes.
At the very least, you're on rails way more than the other games.
Yeah, there's things to find. There's a notable scene towards the middle where you're exploring a sort of storm-destroyed Arcadia Bay, and
that was cool.
And there's a lot of little things to do and discover there, but I think what they were really going for here was they wanted this to feel like a build to a conclusion. They wanted it to be accelerating. I felt that the most forward motion this episode had was right at the beginning, when Max was desperately trying to get out of the dark room. And then it kind of hit a bit of a pacing wall, exploring Arcadia Bay after the storm hit, and then flashing back before that, and the weird sort of interior world that she had to explore that was like a hallucination or dream based on your previous choices.
I kept waiting for what it made me think of was being John Malkovich. I kept waiting for there to be like 100 Maxes all going Max, Maxine. It's just over
Super
and
Max.
Over and over and over. I like thematically, I thought that was good. As like everything culminates in this, like, at least at that moment, it feels like everything's culminating in this super trippy, really weird thing.
And then it has a goddamn stealth area in it. Like, it hit a pacing wall right there.
Yeah, playing it was a little boring.
Yeah, and
You
it
know,
shouldn't
and-
have been. Like, this is all stuff that we could have easily gotten in a cutscene, and I would have felt better about it. Like, we got images from, moments that we'd been through in the game as sort of little dioramas we could walk past, sort of like in-game flashbacks, and we got a weird stealth area where we were trying to sneak past creepy versions of all of the characters that we've encountered. None of that stuff really mattered to me at that point. I knew I was reaching the end of the game. I knew that we were coming to some final, moment between Chloe and Max. And at this point, it was like all that anyone cares about in this is Chloe and Max. Like, Max is making herself, is like hurting herself, trying to save Chloe, trying to flash back to bring Chloe back from the dead. And all this other stuff, like, we could have had way less of it. It was filler.
It was psychedelics for psychedelics, like, purpose. It was like a Pink Floyd music video.
So, surrealism aside, what was your final choice?
Oh, geez.
Well,
so like we finally get to the scene at the top of the lighthouse with the storm barreling down on Arcadia Bay, and with all of the realizations we've had, Max and Chloe both now know that all of the things that are happening, the storm that's bearing down and about to kill everyone that they've ever known in Arcadia Bay, and all the other shit that's happened, is all because of Max's time powers. And Max has one final choice to make. She can either flash back to the very beginning of the story and allow Chloe to die, allow Nathan to shoot Chloe, which would presumably save the town, or she can sacrifice the entire town, let the giant storm tear through and kill everybody in town, including including Chloe's mom, including every character we know at school, like Warren. That was what really pushed me
Warren,
over
your
the edge.
favorite.
I was like, kill Warren. Oh, right. What did you guys choose?
I killed Chloe.
I did as well.
I went the other way.
I mean, I had seen Chloe die many times by that point. And I knew the relationship was intense, but I felt, based on Max's personality, that if she let Chloe live and destroy a town, that relationship would be forever poisoned.
I see what you mean. And I kind of made the choice knowing that, like, this didn't seem like the choice that the developer wants you to make. That's one of my problems with the ending of the game, which I have.
Oh, it was a clear choice.
Yeah. And it's even more clear in the fact that, like, if you do choose to save Chloe and let the town burn, so to speak, the scene that follows is really short. Like, you and Chloe get in your truck and drive through the destroyed town. It's not even all that, like, grim. Like, there's no bodies anywhere. It's just like a bunch of knocked down houses, and you just drive away, and that's the end. And it's almost wordless. And yet, it's very short, and it feels a little bit like the developer is just saying, "Oh, you want that, huh? I guess we'll make an ending for you." But really, the clear choice here is to sacrifice Chloe to save the town.
I don't know. I thought about it for a short amount of time. Like, I felt like there were decisions that were harder in this game than this one. And to me, I thought like Chloe makes the case herself strong enough where she's like, "You need to do this. You should kill me or let me die so that none of this happens." And maybe if she was like, "Let's get out of it," like, if she made a case for herself, like, other than, like, she wants you to do it, or at least she like acts like she wants you to do it. And then when you just do, like, I don't know, math isn't the right word for it, but when you think about it, it's like this entire town and everyone that's alive in there, and mostly innocent, and as we've seen, good people for the most part. Like, it makes the most sense to sacrifice Chloe.
I expected and was frankly angry that they didn't give me an option to flash back to the beginning and sacrifice Max to save Chloe. I thought that would have been more true to Max's outlook, because at this point Chloe was the most important thing in Max's world.
Absolutely.
Like she was everything to her. She was tearing apart the world. She was going through hell to save Chloe. And I just felt like I couldn't have, like, having played through that scene, the whole last half of the game, you know, multiple episodes, the whole thing was about Max fiercely fighting to save Chloe. And I just couldn't watch her die. Like, and I was emotional about it. And I do feel like the game, like, it has some faults here. And even this ending, which emotionally affected me pretty strongly, it wasn't perfect. There's some flaws here. It's not, I mean, but ultimately I have to say, like, this game is really, like, it worked on me emotionally. I was upset. I was like, I was like really upset at the world, you know? I was like, this game is forcing me to make a choice that I don't want to make. Either choice seems shitty. And I made the choice, and I decided, damn it, I'm glad I did it. I was like, Chloe is the most important thing. All those other people can go to hell.
Yeah. I said I made the decision quickly, but that didn't weigh on me any less. I had a lot of time. I haven't really talked about it in the podcast, but I was left one job and started a new job. And in between that time, I pretty much played all of Life is Strange, and it has been a heavy game on me. I've thought a lot about it. And I would say that I can't think of another game that I've played that made me think like this game did, made me as connected in this type of way to characters. And while I ultimately decided to kill Chloe, it wasn't like
Sacrifice Chloe.
Sacrifice Chloe. It wasn't like a beep boop bop, math adds up, you know, Chloe does not equal a whole town. It was a heavy scene. I do think there were heavier scenes in the game than this one.
And there's just a lovely mechanic introduced in the fourth episode when you see a bunch of photographs that you've seen throughout the game replaced. And if you choose to sacrifice Chloe, you see those photographs that you've seen throughout the game, that you've taken throughout the game, be replaced with pictures of Chloe's funeral or people sitting alone.
And you go to the funeral.
It's really affecting.
It is sad, yeah.
But you also see a butterfly, and you see a sunrise, and you see that you've saved a town that would have been destroyed. Mm-hmm. So I think one advantage of this game over some other games that I've played with multiple endings and a good ending and a bad ending is that the game goes out of its way to validate both endings.
Yeah. And in a sense, it's really a game, like, with that ending in place, like, you know, letting Chloe go in order to save the day, so to speak. What the game really adds up to is a story about accepting loss, you know, accepting, like, and you know, maybe in my main playthrough, I did see the other ending. Maybe in my main playthrough, I decided, no, I reject this. I will not lose her. But the game really is sort of about, you know, Max loses someone who, while she had drifted out of her life, was incredibly dear and important to her, and then spends the entirety of the story of the game struggling against that fact and watching her friend die again and again, and struggling even more to save it and to you know, deny that this is happening or to reject it. And then essentially the end is kind of her accepting it. And structured that way, I think it's, you know, I think it's got something going for it there. Like, it's sort of about this, about dealing with loss.
It's really meaningful to me to see Max sacrifice Chloe, knowing that she is losing all the possibility that she's just explored. I mean, she's also sacrificing her power. So it's saying everything that I've experienced in the last week the highs and lows, the craziness, I mean, all the madness that's happened isn't worth the lives of innocent people. It's very much a, hero's sacrifice. And I applaud the developers for loading each choice with, each choice, if you take it, feels like the right decision. And most games will make you feel guilty as hell for picking what they decided is bad.
Mm-hmm.
This game doesn't give you that judgment.
Yeah, even the Telltale games, who do a great job. I like all the Telltale games. The weight or like the impact doesn't. I'd say this game feels a lot heavier. Even some of the like lighter decisions in this game feel more complex.
Yeah, and that's interesting because there's so many ways in which, like, The Walking Dead, for example, is like technically superior. The writing is better. There's so many ways that game, you can recommend it over Life is Strange. And yet, just on a, I think it really just comes down to subject matter. Like, there's never been a game before, I think, made that was so much about just this sort of character, this sort of like struggle. Like it's so down to earth and personal, despite all of its time powers and murder mystery. It's a game that's really walking some new paths here. And so even though it has all these little flaws, like I think it's really an important game.
Well, and I feel that I know Max, even though in a lot of ways Max is whatever you want Max to be. Feel more connected to Max than pretty much any other video game character I can think of. Like, I can't think of one that I felt more in touch with, I guess, or aligned with.
Yeah, so in that mode, I have one kind of universal question for the series. I'm wondering, what was your hardest decision?
I don't know if I can answer that immediately.
I mean, for me, it was who to blame for Kate's suicide. I agonized over that decision, and I almost picked Jefferson. And now I wish, because it would have made me feel self-righteous, Jefferson, if I had picked Jefferson. But I picked Nathan. But I agonized over that.
I had a lot of thinking about this, and I wish I'd have chosen the pancakes.
Eggs and bacon every time. Come on. One that, and I know Reagan's not going to care about this, but of the more recent
he has no
ones,
soul.
Of the more recent ones, it was whether to let Warren entirely beat the shit out of Nathan or not.
Oh yeah, that was really an interesting one. Yeah, that was rough because like I thought, Max won't. You don't want Max wouldn't want Warren beating the shit out of Nathan, but if he doesn't, Nathan walks away with the gun. So there's an element to it where it's like
Chloe has.
or Chloe has the gun. So either Nathan or Chloe has the gun, and they're both loose cannons. Anybody with a gun in this game is a loose cannon.
Well, and
Why
for
doesn't
me,
Max get a gun?
it was the so that was the gun that Chloe bought to Frank. So if I had not, because I let Warren beat the shit out of Nathan, because I thought, you know what, at that point I was all in on Nathan going down. It was like Warren doesn't have to worry about anything because I'm bringing down Nathan, and part of him going down is getting his ass kicked by Warren. But then that allowed Chloe to have the gun, which then would ultimately be the gun that shot Frank. So I was like, oh my God, what have I done?
I wonder, since Chloe in my game had David's gun, I wonder if I had let him beat the shit out of Nathan, if Chloe would have just had double guns.
Yeah. Another one that I did have a hard time with, and this is also in chapter 5, is we kind of glossed over this as we've been kind of speeding through chapter 5 because most of it can be, but ultimately David is kind of the main reason that you do get out of the dark room one way or another. And if you have the choice of whether to tell him Chloe was killed or not, and if you tell him Chloe was killed by Mr. Jefferson, he will then just go and shoot on, like, Jefferson is on the ground knocked out, and David will walk up and shoot him in the back of the head. If you don't tell him he was killed, then he doesn't do that, and he just, like, presumably
that was a
calls
tough one.
Calls the police, and Jefferson goes to prison. Did you guys? I'm assuming everyone had that come up.
Mm-hmm.
I thought very, very hard about letting David kill Mr. Jefferson, because I thought David wouldn't get in trouble for it. I'm sure there would be a million different ways that it would be fine. And Mr. Jefferson, that's fine. But then I thought about, like, that may ruin David's life, and there's no reason he should have to go through that. And I'd rather Mr. Jefferson have to face the shame of.
This was the first time that I let a decision stay based on the decision. So, it was tell the truth or don't. Mm-hmm. I told the truth. There was a murder, cause result, and it was one of the only times I let it stay.
Yeah, surprisingly, I would have thought that this would have been more split, or less split, actually. I would have thought that more people would have, not wanted David to kill Jefferson. But actually, 53% didn't let him kill Jefferson, but 47% did. That's a pretty even split. So, yeah, wow. Yeah, there's a lot of really tough choices throughout the whole game, but yeah, those do stand out.
In my mind, in a future 5 years from now, I'm 120 pounds, and I never get hung over because I will be
Well,
the picture of
I have to say that I'm really glad we decided to do this game for the show. I might not have picked it up otherwise, but I think it was maybe one of the best games of the year. Now we're coming down towards the end of the year, and it stands out to me as, for sure, the best sort of narrative adventure style game that I played this year, at least. It's almost pointless for us to say at the end of a podcast this long where people can find the game. You've already downloaded this game, dear listener. If you have any games that you think are interesting and you want to recommend them to us, we really love those sorts of recommendations. And many of the upcoming episodes that will be coming to you shortly will be about games that were recommended by listeners, either on our website through our contact form or info@theshortgame.net, or on Twitter @_shortgame. So get in touch with us any one of those ways and let us know if there's anything that you think we should be checking out. I've been your host, Reagan Kelly, and you can find me on Twitter @ReaganK, that's RayGanK. Laura, where can people find you?
You can also find me on Twitter @LauraJNash.
And Nate, where can people find you?
On Twitter @NateSTL.
And thank you once again for joining us on this episode of The Short Game.
And in my